The Sunday morning light filtered through unfamiliar floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric shadows across marble I didn't recognize. My head throbbed with the dull persistence of too many cocktails and too little sleep, but the Egyptian cotton robe I'd borrowed from Alessandra felt like wearing a cloud. I cinched it tighter around my waist, bare feet silent against heated floors as I followed the scent of fresh espresso toward what I hoped was the kitchen. The events of the previous night replayed in fragments. The club, Alessandra laughing, dragging me to the dance floor despite my protests. The emergency call at 3 a.m. Her mother, Paula, rushed to the hospital with chest pains. The frantic cancellation of my ride home. Alessandra's exhausted voice insisting I crash at her family's penthouse rather than navigate the city alone at that hour. "Just sleep on the couch," she'd said, pressing keys into my palm. "Everyone's at the hospital. You'll have the place to yourself." Everyone. Right. I rounded the corner into a kitchen that belonged in an architectural magazine, all black granite and stainless steel, with a massive island that could seat 8. The espresso machine gleamed like a sculpture, and I'd managed to coax it into producing something drinkable after 5 minutes of button-pressing experimentation. Now I stood at that island, cup warming my hands, watching the city wake up 20 stories below. My restoration studio would be closed today. Sundays were sacred for someone who spent 6 days a week hunched over centuries-old manuscripts with magnifying glasses and delicate brushes. But my mind was already cataloging the week ahead. The 1847 poetry collection with water damage, the Renaissance cookbook whose binding needed complete reconstruction, the medieval illuminated page that... "Who are you?" The voice came from behind me, low and sharp as a blade drawn in darkness. I spun, espresso sloshing over the rim of my cup and burning my thumb. The man standing in the kitchen doorway made the expansive room feel suddenly smaller, like all the air had been sucked toward him and held captive. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of presence that made you step back without meaning to. Dark hair, slightly disheveled from sleep, fell across a forehead creased with what I recognized as controlled fury. He wore black sleep pants and nothing else, revealing a torso that suggested either religious dedication to a gym or a profession that required physical readiness. But it was his eyes that pinned me in place, dark, almost black, assessing me with the cold calculation of someone deciding if I was threat or nuisance. I'd never met him. 4 years of friendship with Alessandra, and I'd successfully avoided every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every casual mention of "you should come by the house." Because I knew who lived here. Everyone in the city knew the Romano name, even if they pretended not to. "I asked you a question." He moved further into the kitchen, each step deliberate. Not rushing, but advancing with the certainty of someone who'd never been denied an answer in his life. I set down my cup with more force than necessary, the sharp click echoing in the tension-thick air. "Julia, I'm Alessandra's friend." His expression didn't soften. If anything, the lines around his mouth deepened. "Alessandra doesn't bring friends home. She didn't bring me. She lent me her couch after your mother's emergency last night." I crossed my arms, suddenly very aware I was wearing nothing but his sister's robe and yesterday's underwear. "I'm assuming you're the brother she spent 4 years making sure I never meet." Something flickered in those dark eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition that his sister had been as deliberate about keeping us apart as I'd been about avoiding him. "Giacomo," he said, but didn't extend his hand. Just stood there, bare-chested and imposing, studying me like I was a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit the picture he'd expected. I'd heard the name whispered in certain circles. Giacomo Romano, 34 years old. Took over the family business when his father, Giuseppe, stepped back 5 years ago. The business. Everyone knew what that meant, even if the tax return said real estate development and import-export consulting. "You're wearing my robe," he said. I looked down at the charcoal silk. Alessandra said, "That's mine." Hers are in the guest suite. She gave you mine. Heat crawled up my neck, but I refused to show embarrassment. Instead, I channeled every ounce of composure I used when dealing with museum curators who questioned my restoration methods. I'll return it once my clothes are dry. Your sister insisted on washing them because apparently I smelled like a distillery. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You're a drunk friend who crashes on couches? I'm a book restorer who went to one club in 6 months because her best friend guilted her into it, had 3 drinks over 4 hours, and ended up here because medical emergencies don't care about ride schedules. I picked up my espresso again, taking a deliberate sip while maintaining eye contact. And I don't crash on couches. I sleep on them when invited by people who don't want me taking the subway alone at 4 a.m. For a long moment, he said nothing. Just looked at me with that unsettling intensity, like he was reading a language I didn't know I was writing. Then he moved to the espresso machine, his shoulder brushing mine as he reached for a cup from the cabinet above my head. The brief contact sent an unwelcome jolt through my system. Pure awareness of skin and heat, and the faint scent of cedar and something darker I couldn't name. I stepped aside, putting the island between us. He prepared his espresso with the efficiency of routine, every movement economical. When he finally turned back to me, cup in hand, his expression had shifted into something I couldn't quite read. Book restorer, he repeated, as if testing the words. You work with old things. I preserve them. There's a difference. I kept my voice level, professional. This was familiar ground, explaining my work to people who didn't understand why anyone would spend months on a single manuscript. I repair damage, stabilize deterioration, and sometimes reconstruct bindings that haven't existed for centuries. You recreate what's missing. I interpret what was there and build frameworks that support what remains. The distinction mattered. I wasn't forging history. I was protecting it. He took a slow sip of espresso, watching me over the rim. Alessandra never mentioned you. We had an agreement. Her family life stayed separate from our friendship. I shrugged, aiming for casual. Easier that way. Easier for who? Both of us. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to elaborate. He didn't need to know that Alessandra had warned me, years ago, about the complicated dynamics of being a Romano. About expectations and obligations, and the weight of a name that opened doors and closed others. About her brother, specifically, and why it was better if we never crossed paths. Giacomo set down his cup with the same deliberate care I'd observed in every movement so far. How long have you known my sister? 4 years. We met at a gallery opening. She was there for the art. I was there because they were exhibiting a restored medieval book of hours I'd worked on. 4 years. He said it like he was calculating something, running numbers that didn't add up to his satisfaction. And this is the first time you've been here. I don't make a habit of visiting friends' homes uninvited. But you're comfortable enough to help yourself to my kitchen, to my coffee, to my robe. I felt my temper stir, that part of me that emerged only when someone pushed too deliberately. Your sister offered all 3. If you have a problem with her hospitality, take it up with her. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You have a sharp tongue for someone standing in a stranger's kitchen wearing his clothes. You have a lot of questions for someone whose sister's friend I'm supposed to be. Supposed to be, he repeated, latching onto the phrase. Interesting choice of words. I realized my mistake immediately. I am her friend. You meant you're not sure if I believe you. He moved around the island, closing the distance I'd carefully maintained. Not threatening, but deliberate. You meant you're aware that strange women don't typically appear in my home without my knowledge. My pulse kicked up, but I held my ground. Then you should improve your security. I walked right in with a key. Alessandra's key, which she gave you, during an emergency, when everyone was at the hospital. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Convenient timing. You think I orchestrated your mother's health scare? Disbelief colored my voice. That's paranoid even for... I stopped myself, but not quickly enough. Even for what? His tone dropped lower, dangerous. Finish that thought. I should have backed down, should have apologized, explained, smoothed over the insult I'd nearly voiced. But something about him, about the way he looked at me like I was either lying or irrelevant, brought out a recklessness I usually kept buried under layers of professional caution and careful politeness. Even for someone with your reputation, I said quietly. I've heard the stories, Giacomo. Everyone has. But I'm not part of whatever world you inhabit. I'm a restorer who works in a studio barely larger than this kitchen, who spends her days with glue and century-old paper. I'm not a threat. I'm not even interesting enough to be suspicious of. His expression shifted again, that unreadable mask cracking just enough for me to glimpse something underneath. Not anger, something closer to intrigue. You know who I am, he said. Not a question. I know what people say. I don't know if it's true, and I don't want to know. I picked up my cup, needing something to do with my hands. I'm here by accident. I'll be gone as soon as my clothes are dry, and Alessandra confirms her mother is stable. Then you can forget you ever saw me. I don't forget faces. The way he said it made my skin prickle. Not a threat, a statement of fact, delivered with the casual certainty of someone who'd trained himself to catalog and remember every detail. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the counter. Alessandra's name lit up the screen. I grabbed it, grateful for the interruption. Hey, how's your mom? False alarm, thank God. Panic attack, not cardiac. They're keeping her for observation, but she's okay. Alessandra's voice carried the exhausted relief of someone who'd spent hours in a hospital waiting room. I'm so sorry I abandoned you there. Did you sleep okay? I looked at Giacomo, who was watching me with that same unsettling focus. The couch was fine. Good. Listen, we're going to be here a few more hours. Can you stay put? I'll bring breakfast when I get back, and we can... Actually, I should probably head home. I have work to prep for tomorrow. Julia? Alessandra's tone shifted into something more serious. Did something happen? You sound weird. Nothing happened, I paused, choosing words carefully with her brother standing 3 feet away. I met Giacomo. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, Oh. Yeah. Is he being an ass? Put him on. I'll tell him to. It's fine. We're fine. Just having coffee. I forced brightness into my voice. But I really should get going soon. Your clothes won't be dry for another hour at least. I put them through a second cycle because they really did smell like a bar floor. She hesitated. Look, Giacomo's bark is worse than his bite. Usually, just stay out of his way, and he'll leave you alone. I glanced at the man in question, who had moved to lean against the counter, arms crossed over his bare chest, clearly not planning to leave me alone anytime soon. Sure, I lied. I'll see you when you get back. I ended the call before she could press further. Giacomo raised an eyebrow. Lying to my sister? Omitting details? There's a difference. You seem to make a lot of distinctions. Precision matters in my work. In mine, too. He straightened, rolling his shoulders in a way that emphasized the breadth of them. Alessandra said I should leave you alone. That would be ideal. But I don't take orders from my little sister. He picked up his espresso cup, drained the last of it, and set it in the sink with careful deliberation. And I'm curious about the woman who's been her closest friend for 4 years without ever setting foot in this house. Some of us value privacy. Some of us have reasons for staying invisible. He turned back to face me fully. Which is it for you, Julia? The way he said my name, rolling the syllables with precision, tasting each one, made something in my chest tighten. I'd heard my name 1,000 times, but never quite like that. Never with that particular weight. I set down my empty cup, my restoration instincts kicking in. When faced with something fragile or dangerous, the best approach was careful handling and strategic retreat. "I'm going to check on my clothes," I said, moving toward the doorway. He didn't stop me, but his voice followed me out. "The laundry room is down the hall, third door on the left." I paused, glancing back. "How did you know I didn't know where it was?" His smile was slight, knowing. "Because if you knew this house well enough to find the laundry room, you'd know better than to use my espresso machine." I walked away before he could see my reaction, my heart beating faster than it should from a simple conversation in a kitchen. Behind me, I heard him move, heard water running as he rinsed his cup. Normal. Domestic sounds that felt surreal coming from a man whose reputation suggested he was anything but ordinary. I found the laundry room exactly where he'd said, the machines humming with their final cycle. Through the small window, I could see the city stretching out in morning light, steel and glass and millions of people who had no idea what it felt like to stand in Giacomo Romano's kitchen wearing his robe, feeling like prey that had accidentally wandered into a predator's territory. The machine beeped. I transferred my clothes to the dryer, started the cycle, and leaned against the warm metal, closing my eyes. 45 minutes. That's how long until I could dress, leave, and return to my carefully constructed life, where dangerous men were confined to history books, and the only tension I managed was in leather bindings and paper fibers. 45 minutes, and then I'd never have to see him again. When I opened my eyes, he was standing in the doorway. "You're persistent," I said, aiming for annoyed but landing somewhere closer to breathless. "You're still here." He leaned against the doorframe, and I noticed details I'd missed before. A faint scar along his jaw, calluses on his hands that didn't match the luxury of his home, the way he held himself, not relaxed, never relaxed, but coiled, ready. "My clothes are drying." "I can see that." His gaze dropped briefly to the spinning dryer, then back to me. "You're uncomfortable. I'm in a stranger's laundry room wearing his robe. It's not exactly my comfort zone. But you're not afraid." I considered lying, decided against it. Should I be? He was quiet for a moment, that calculating look returning. "Most people are. Of me. Of this house. Of what they think they know." "I'm not most people." "No," he agreed. "You're not." The dryer hummed between us, filling the silence with its steady rhythm. Outside the window, the city continued its Sunday morning routine, oblivious to the strange tension trapped in this small room. "Alessandra never told me she was protecting you from me," he said finally. "I thought she was protecting me from her friends, from people who wanted access to the family. Maybe she was protecting us both. From what?" I met his eyes, seeing past the intimidation to something else. Curiosity, genuine interest. The same look I got when examining a manuscript and finding unexpected damage beneath the surface, the urge to understand what caused it, how deep it went, whether it could be repaired. "From complications," I said softly. His laugh was short, humorless. "Too late for that." Before I could ask what he meant, the dryer beeped its completion. I moved to open it, but he was faster, reaching past me to pull out my clothes. The heat from the dryer mixed with the heat from his proximity, and I found myself pressed back against the machine, trapped between warm metal and warmer skin. He handed me the bundle of clothes, his fingers brushing mine. "Get dressed. I'll make you breakfast before you go." "You don't have to." "I know." He stepped back, giving me space. "But Alessandra would never forgive me if I let her friend leave hungry. And despite what you might think, I'm not entirely uncivilized. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with my warm clothes and the lingering scent of cedar. I dressed quickly in the laundry room, grateful to be back in my own jeans and sweater, even if they were wrinkled from the dryer. The robe I folded carefully, running my fingers over the silk before setting it aside. When I returned to the kitchen, Giacomo had dressed, black jeans and a white Henley that somehow made him look more dangerous than the bare chest had. He was at the stove, doing something with eggs and vegetables that smelled impossible to resist. "Sit," he said without turning around. I sat at the island, watching him work. His movements were efficient, practiced. Not the cooking of someone who hired chefs, but of someone who'd learned by necessity. "You cook," I observed. Surprising? Unexpected. He glanced over his shoulder. I'm full of surprises. The omelet he slid in front of me 5 minutes later was perfect. Fluffy, golden, filled with herbs I couldn't name, but tasted like something between memory and promise. I ate in silence, aware of him watching me between sips of fresh espresso. When I finished, I pushed the plate away and met his gaze. "Thank you. For breakfast. For not throwing me out." "Why would I throw you out?" "Because I'm wearing your clothes, drinking your coffee, and apparently disrupting your Sunday morning routine." "You assume I have a routine." "Everyone has a routine. Mine is coffee, studio, 12 hours of meticulous work, home, sleep, repeat." I stood, collecting my plate. "What's yours?" He took the plate from my hands, his fingers lingering against mine a moment too long. "That depends on the day. Today's Sunday. Today my routine apparently includes interrogating my sister's friend in my kitchen." He rinsed the plate, set it in the dishwasher. "I haven't decided yet if that's an inconvenience or an opportunity." "Opportunity for what?" He turned to face me fully, and in the morning light streaming through those massive windows, I saw him clearly for the first time. Not just the intimidating presence or the dangerous reputation, but the man underneath. Tired, watchful, alone in a penthouse built for a family. "To understand why Alessandra kept you hidden," he said quietly, "and whether she was right to do it." Before I could respond, the front door opened. Alessandra's voice called out, "Julia, I'm back. Did my brother terrorize you? Or can I still claim he's human?" I looked at Giacomo, found him already looking at me with an expression I couldn't name. "We'll see," I murmured, then walked past him toward my friend's voice, feeling his eyes on me the entire way. 3 weeks passed before I saw him again. 3 weeks where I convinced myself the encounter had been a fluke, an accident of timing that would never repeat. I returned to my studio in the historic district, to the familiar smell of leather and aged paper, to the rhythm of careful work that required patience, measured in millimeters and hours, measured in breaths held while applying adhesive to surfaces that could disintegrate under the wrong pressure. Alessandra and I fell back into our usual pattern: coffee dates at our regular cafe, weekend gallery visits, long phone calls where she vented about family expectations, and I listened without pressing for details. She never mentioned that Sunday morning, and neither did I. Some things were easier left in the category of things that happened once and need never be discussed. But on a Thursday afternoon, as autumn rain streaked my studio windows, and I worked under the bright LED lamps that mimicked natural light, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I need your professional expertise. Name your rate." G. I stared at the message for a full minute before responding. "How did you get this number?" "Alessandra's phone while she was in the bathroom." "How much do you charge for consultations?" The audacity should have annoyed me. Instead, I found myself almost smiling at the image of Giacomo Romano stealing his sister's phone like a teenager. $200 for consultations. $300 if you want me to actually touch anything. What kind of item? Old book. Possibly valuable. Possibly damaged beyond repair. I need someone who knows the difference. I set down my brush. My curiosity officially piqued. In my line of work, old book could mean anything from a Victorian novel to an illuminated manuscript worth more than my entire year's salary. Where is it? My office. Can you come tomorrow? 10 a.m. I should have said no. Should have recommended one of my colleagues. Maintained the distance Alessandra had wisely established. But the restorer in me couldn't resist the mystery of an unknown book. And if I was being honest with myself, another part of me wanted to see him again, to prove the tension in his kitchen had been imagined, to demonstrate I could be professional in his presence. Send me the address, and have coffee ready. Good coffee, already planning on it. The address he sent was downtown, in one of those buildings where the lobby required 3 forms of security clearance, and the elevator buttons went up to 40. I arrived at 9:55 a.m., dressed in my usual work clothes, black pants, simple blouse, hair pulled back in a practical twist. Professional armor. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and sharper suit, looked up as I approached. Julia Ferretti? That's me. Mr. Romano is expecting you. 40th floor, corner office. Angelo will escort you. Angelo materialized from a side door, tall, built like he ate weights for breakfast, with the watchful eyes of someone trained to see threats in shadows. He didn't speak as we rode the elevator up, just positioned himself between me and the door in a way that was probably unconscious habit. The 40th floor opened onto a reception area that managed to be both luxurious and austere. Dark wood, leather seating, and a view of the city that probably cost more per square foot than most people's homes. This way, Angelo said, his first words since we'd met. His accent placed him from the south, maybe Sicily. He led me down a hallway lined with what looked like original artwork. Not reproductions, but pieces I recognized from auction catalogs. A Caravaggio sketch, a Bernini study. Either Giacomo had excellent taste or excellent advisors. The corner office at the end of the hall had floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 walls, a massive desk that looked hand-carved from a single piece of walnut, and bookshelves that made my restorer's heart skip several beats. First editions. Rare volumes. Manuscripts I could see even from the doorway were in desperate need of attention. Giacomo stood at the window, phone to his ear, speaking rapid Italian too low for me to catch. He'd exchanged Sunday morning casual for what I assumed was his working uniform. Black suit, white shirt with the top 2 buttons undone, no tie. The kind of calculated informality that probably intimidated everyone he met. He turned as Angelo announced me, ending his call mid-sentence. Julia, punctual. You're paying by the hour. Seemed wasteful to be late. I stepped further into the office, my attention already drawn to the bookshelves. Are all of these yours? Collected over the years. Some inherited, some acquired. He moved to his desk, where a cloth-wrapped bundle sat waiting. But this is what I need you to see. I approached carefully, setting down my equipment bag and pulling on the cotton gloves I always carried. May I? He gestured permission. I unwrapped the cloth slowly, and my breath caught. The book beneath was small, maybe 8 inches by 6, bound in leather that had once been dyed a rich burgundy, but had faded to mottled brown with age. The binding was loose, the spine cracked, but the craftsmanship visible in the hand-tooled cover design suggested something special. Where did you get this? I asked, carefully opening to the title page. My grandfather's estate. It was in a box of papers no one bothered sorting through until last month. He leaned against his desk, watching me work. The attorney handling the estate thought it might be worth having appraised. The title page was in Latin, hand-lettered in what looked like 15th century script. I felt my pulse quicken, the kind of excitement that came from recognizing something significant. This is a manuscript, I said softly, turning pages with the reverence they deserved. Not a printed book, hand-copied, probably by a monk or professional scribe. I examined the marginalia, the decorated initials. Late 1400s, I'd guess. Italian origin, based on the script style. What's it worth? I looked up, found him watching me with that same intense focus from his kitchen. Depends on what it is. Could be a few thousand if it's a common religious text. Could be 100,000 or more if it's something rare. I turned another page, squinted at the faded ink. I'd need to do a full assessment. Research the text, verify the age, check for any provenance documentation. How long? 2 weeks minimum for a preliminary assessment. Longer if you want a complete historical analysis and restoration plan. He nodded slowly. And if I wanted you to restore it? Return it to readable condition? Months, maybe a year, depending on the extent of damage. I closed the book carefully, running my gloved fingers over the cover. This kind of work can't be rushed. Every page needs individual attention. Every repair needs to be reversible in case future technology offers better solutions. You care about the future of books you'll never see again. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I care about preservation. These objects survived centuries of war, weather, and neglect. If I can give them another few centuries, that matters. He studied me for a long moment. Most people in my experience only care about what benefits them directly. Then you're talking to the wrong people. His smile was slight but genuine, apparently. Angelo appeared in the doorway. Boss, Marino's here for the 10:30. Giacomo's expression shifted instantly, from almost relaxed to entirely cold. Put him in conference room 2. I'll be there in 5. Angelo withdrew, and I started rewrapping the manuscript. I should go. Send me high-resolution photos of every page, and I'll start preliminary research. Stay. I paused, looking up. What? The meeting. Stay for it. He moved to a cabinet, poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal decanter. I might need your professional opinion on something. I'm a book restorer, not a business consultant. Marino collects rare books, claims to be an expert. I'd like someone who actually knows what they're talking about in the room. I should have refused. Should have recognized this for what it probably was. Some power play in a world I didn't understand and didn't want to. But curiosity won again. Fine, but my rate applies for the full time I'm here. Wouldn't expect otherwise. The conference room 2 doors down was all glass and steel, with a table that could seat 20. Currently it seated 1, a man in his mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit, and the kind of smile that made my instincts scream warning. Fabiano, Giacomo said, his tone cordial but empty of warmth. Thank you for coming. Giacomo. Marino stood, extending his hand. They shook with the careful choreography of people who trusted each other about as far as they could throw pianos. I wasn't aware we'd have company. Julia Ferretti. She's consulting on some items from my grandfather's estate. Giacomo gestured for me to sit, took the chair at the head of the table. I thought her expertise might be relevant to our discussion. Marino's eyes assessed me with the quick calculation of someone used to identifying leverage. A pleasure. You're an appraiser? Restorer, I corrected. I work with manuscripts and rare books. Fascinating field. His smile widened. I'm something of a collector myself. Perhaps you've heard of my library? I had. Anyone in the rare book world had heard of Fabiano Marino's collection. Extensive, expensive, and rumored to include several items of questionable provenance. Your reputation precedes you, I said neutrally. Giacomo's mouth twitched, almost amusement at my diplomatic non-answer. The meeting that followed was a masterclass in veiled threats and careful negotiation. Marino wanted something. Property rights to a warehouse district near the docks. Giacomo had those rights and no apparent intention of selling. They danced around the issue for 20 minutes, each making offers that weren't really offers, suggesting compromises that weren't really compromises. I sat quietly, watching the performance. This was a different side of Giacomo, not the man who'd made me breakfast, but the one who controlled territories and commanded fear. His voice never rose, his expression never shifted, but authority radiated from him like heat from stone. Then Marino played what he clearly thought was his trump card. "I have something you might be interested in." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos, turned the screen toward Giacomo. "A first edition Dante's Inferno, 1472. Authenticated. I'd be willing to trade it for the warehouse rights." Giacomo glanced at the photo, then at me. "Julia?" I leaned forward, examining the image on screen. The book looked right. Correct binding style, appropriate aging, the kind of piece that would make any collector salivate. But something was off. "May I?" I gestured for the phone. Marino handed it over, confidence written across his face. I zoomed in on the title page, examined the typography, the spacing, checked the image of the colophon, the printer's mark at the end. Then I handed the phone back. "It's a fake." Silence dropped like a stone. Marino's smile froze. "Excuse me?" "The typeface is wrong for Nicholas Laurenti's print shop. He used a specific font design that's documented in multiple surviving examples from that period. This is close, but not exact." I kept my voice professional, factual. "Also, the paper shows aging consistent with perhaps 200 years, not 500. Someone did an excellent job artificially distressing it, but the fiber composition is wrong for 15th century Italian paper mills." Marino's face had gone carefully blank. "You're mistaken." "I'm not." I pulled out my phone, found reference images from legitimate 1472 Dante editions. "See the difference in the letter forms? The spacing between lines? Whoever forged this was skilled, but they used modern references instead of studying actual period examples." Giacomo's expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had sharpened. "Fabiano, you tried to trade me a counterfeit. The authentication documents can be forged as easily as the book." Giacomo stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. "This meeting is over. Giacomo, there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is that you thought I wouldn't verify your claims." His voice dropped lower, colder. "The warehouse stays mine, and you'll leave now, before I decide this insult requires a more direct response." Marino left, his earlier confidence shattered into careful retreat. After the door closed, Giacomo turned to me. "How certain are you?" "Completely. I'd stake my professional reputation on it." I met his gaze steadily. "That book is worth maybe 5,000 as a curiosity, not the 500,000 a genuine first edition would command." He nodded once, then smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. "You just saved me from a very expensive mistake. That's what you pay me for." "No." He moved closer, and I caught that cedar scent again. "I pay you to assess and restore books. You just demonstrated you're worth significantly more than your hourly rate." My pulse kicked up, but I kept my expression neutral. "Flattery doesn't get you a discount." "Good. I don't want to discount you." Before I could parse that statement, my phone buzzed. Alessandra, asking if I wanted to grab lunch. I glanced at the time, 12:30 already. "I should go." "Let me buy you lunch, as thanks for the consultation." "You're already paying me $600 for 3 hours of work. Then let me buy you lunch because I want to." He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "Unless you're avoiding me." "Should I be?" "You tell me. You're the one who's been friends with my sister for 4 years while making sure we never met." Fair point. I considered my options, did the mental calculation. Lunch with Giacomo Romano would either demystify him, prove he was just a man with a dangerous job, or complicate things further. The smart choice was obvious. "One lunch?" I said. "Then I really do need to get back to my studio." "One lunch," he agreed. We went to a restaurant 3 blocks away, the kind of place with a single name on a brass plaque, no menu visible from the street, and a host who greeted Giacomo by name. They seated us at a table by the window, brought water and bread without being asked, and disappeared with the discretion of people who understood exactly who they were serving. "They know you here," I observed. "I own the building. The restaurant is a business investment." "Of course it is." Over lunch, some kind of risotto that melted on my tongue, wine I didn't ask the vintage of, we talked about books. Not his business, not my friendship with his sister, just the safe territory of manuscripts and history, and the strange satisfaction of restoration work. He asked intelligent questions, listened when I explained the difference between conservation and restoration, understood when I described the ethical debates in my field about how much intervention was too much. "You think about legacy," he said eventually, "about what you're leaving behind. Don't you?" He was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the stem of his wineglass. "My legacy is complicated. The family business, the name, the expectations." He looked up, met my eyes. "Sometimes I think it would be easier to preserve books than people. Books don't have competing interests and family obligations." "Exactly." Something in his voice made me ask, "Is that what the warehouse is about? Competing interests?" "Everything is about competing interests." He set down his glass. "Marino wants the docks because they're profitable. I keep them because letting him have them would signal weakness. It's a game where the rules are unwritten and the stakes are always higher than they appear." Sounds exhausting. "It is." He smiled slightly. "Which is why having lunch with someone who cares more about fiber composition than territorial disputes is refreshing." "I'm not that boring." I didn't say boring. I said refreshing. His gaze held mine. "There's a difference." My phone buzzed again. Alessandra following up. "Where are you? Thought we were doing lunch." I typed back quickly. "Got caught up with work. Rain check?" Her response came immediately. "You never get caught up with work. You're the most punctual person I know." "What's going on?" I set down my phone without answering. Giacomo had noticed. "My sister, wondering where I am." "Are you going to tell her that I'm having lunch with you? Should I?" He considered this. "She'll find out eventually. Alessandra has a talent for extracting information. Then she can extract it. I'm not lying, but I'm not volunteering details either. Diplomatic. Practical. She kept us apart for a reason. I'm not eager to explain why I'm ignoring that wisdom." "And why are you?" He leaned forward slightly. "Ignoring it. I should have had an answer ready. Should have prepared some professional justification, some practical reason. Instead, I found myself being honest. Because you're more interesting than I expected. And because I spent 4 years avoiding you based on stories. And I'm curious if the reality matches the reputation. And does it? I don't know yet. You made me breakfast and bought me lunch. Hard to be terrified of someone who feeds me." His laugh was genuine, surprising. "That's your metric? Whether I'm dangerous depends on whether I've provided meals. It's as good a metric as any." We finished lunch, and he walked me back toward my studio. 2 blocks from my building, we passed a bookstore, one of those rare places that still sold actual antiquarian volumes, instead of coffee table books and bestsellers. I paused at the window, caught by a display of medieval manuscripts, facsimiles probably, but beautifully done. "You want to go in?" Giacomo observed. "I always want to go in. I practically live in places like this." I glanced at him. "But you probably have actual work to get back to." "My afternoon is clear until 4. He pushed open the door, holding it. "After you." We spent an hour in that bookstore. He watched me examine volumes. listened to me explain why certain bindings mattered, asked questions that showed he was actually absorbing the information. The owner recognized both of us, me from frequent visits, him from reputation, and left us alone to browse. "You're happy here," he said as we left, my arms full of 3 volumes I absolutely didn't need but couldn't resist. More than in restaurants or offices. Books don't judge me. Neither do I. I looked at him, found his expression serious. "Don't you? Earlier you thought I was suspicious, a threat hiding in your kitchen." "I thought you were unexpected. I've since revised my assessment." "To what?" "Complicated." He took the books from my arms, carrying them despite my protests. In a way I didn't anticipate and don't quite know what to do with. We'd reached my studio, a converted warehouse space I shared with 2 other restoration specialists. The afternoon light slanted through high windows, illuminating dust motes and the familiar chaos of my work table. Giacomo set down my books, taking in the space. "This is where you work." 5 days a week, sometimes 6, sometimes 7 if I'm on a deadline. I hung up my jacket, suddenly aware of how humble my studio looked compared to his office. But I refused to apologize for it. This was mine, built on skill and persistence, not inherited or intimidated. He moved to my work table, examining the manuscript I'd left partially disassembled. "What is this?" 15th century Book of Hours, private commission. The owner's great-grandmother brought it from France, and 3 generations of neglect nearly destroyed it. I joined him, pointing out the damage. "See how the binding's completely separated? And the water staining on these pages. Can you fix it?" "I can stabilize it. Return it to usable condition. But the water damage is permanent. I can only prevent it from getting worse." He was quiet, studying the delicate pages. When he looked up, his expression had softened into something I couldn't quite identify. "You really do care about these objects. They're pieces of history. Someone took the time to create this, to write out prayers by hand, to decorate margins, to bind it in leather they probably cured themselves. That matters. Even though it's broken, especially because it's broken, nothing worth preserving stays perfect." The words hung between us, loaded with meanings I hadn't intended but couldn't take back. Giacomo checked his watch, and I saw the shift back into businessman. "I should go. I have that 4 o'clock. "Of course." I walked him to the door. "Thank you for lunch. Thank you for saving me from Marino's fake Dante." At the threshold, he paused. "Julia?" "Yes?" "I'm going to see you again. Not for work. Not because of Alessandra. Because I want to." My heart kicked against my ribs. That's probably not a good idea. Probably not. He smiled, dangerous and honest. But I stopped caring about good ideas when you walked into my kitchen wearing my robe. Then he left, and I stood in my studio doorway, watching him disappear down the street with his security trailing at a discreet distance. My phone buzzed. Alessandra. Persistent. "Seriously, where did you disappear to? You're being weird." I stared at the message, then at the 3 books Giacomo had carried for me, now stacked on my table beside the manuscript I was restoring. "Complicated," he'd said. He had no idea. The manuscript from Giacomo's grandfather turned out to be something extraordinary. I'd spent 2 weeks researching, cross-referencing, consulting with colleagues across Europe. The Latin text was a previously unknown medical treatise from 1489, written by a physician whose other works had been lost to time. If authenticated, and I was 90% certain of the attribution, it would be worth somewhere in the range of 200,000 euros. I drafted my preliminary report, included photographs and analysis, and sent it to his email on a Wednesday afternoon. Within an hour, my phone rang. "You're sure about this?" His voice carried excitement barely restrained. "Unknown treatise? Museum-worthy? Assuming the carbon dating confirms the age, yes. This is significant, Giacomo. Not just valuable, historically important. When can you start restoration? I'd been preparing for this question. I can't. Not right now. Silence. Then carefully. Why not? I'm booked through next spring with other projects. Some of them are institutional commissions I can't defer. The earliest I could start on your manuscript is May. That's 7 months away. I know, I'm sorry. I can recommend other restorers who specialize in this period. No. Flat. Final. If you can't do it now, I'll wait. But I want you. Something about the way he said it made heat crawl up my neck. 7 months is a long time. Then I'll have 7 months to convince you to move my project up the schedule. Giacomo, have dinner with me. Tonight. The sudden shift caught me off guard. What? Dinner. To celebrate finding out my grandfather's forgotten book is worth a fortune. His tone had changed. Less business and more something else. Unless you're busy. I looked at my work table, at the book of hours that needed another 3 hours of attention tonight if I wanted to meet Friday's deadline. I have work. You always have work. One dinner won't destroy your schedule. He was right, which annoyed me. Fine, but somewhere casual. I'm not dressing up on a Wednesday. Deal? I'll pick you up at 7. He hung up before I could argue the logistics. At 6:45, I was still in my studio, cursing my inability to say no while trying to make my work clothes look intentional rather than haphazard. Black pants, silk blouse, hair down instead of pulled back. The best I could manage without going home to change. At 6:58, a sleek black car pulled up outside. Not a driver, Giacomo himself behind the wheel, which surprised me. He stepped out wearing dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but at least wasn't the full suit armor. You look good, he said, as I slid into the passenger seat. You look like you're trying not to look like yourself. His smile flashed. Is it working? Not even slightly. You still radiate danger and expensive cologne. The cologne is bergamot and cedar, and I'll take danger as a compliment. He drove us to a restaurant in the old district. Stone walls, candlelight, the kind of intimate space where conversations stayed private. We were shown to a corner table, brought wine without ordering, left alone with menus we barely glanced at. Tell me about the manuscript, he said once we'd both settled. The parts you left out of the report. So I did. Explained the physician's background, the context of late 15th century medical knowledge, why this particular text mattered in the history of anatomy and treatment. He listened with complete focus, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite engagement. You light up when you talk about this, he observed. Your whole face changes. This is what I love. Discovering lost knowledge, preserving it for people who'll come after us. No desire for fame, recognition. I get recognition in my field. That's enough. I took a sip of wine, studying him over the rim. What about you? You inherited this empire. Did you want it? His expression shifted, became more guarded. One is complicated when you're born into expectations. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. We ordered food that arrived in careful courses. Between bites, the conversation drifted to safer topics, books we'd read, places we'd traveled, the strange satisfaction of work done well. He told me about his sister's relentless matchmaking attempts, her insistence he needed to settle down with someone suitable. Suitable, I repeated. What does that even mean? Someone from the right family, the right background, someone who understands the business and won't ask uncomfortable questions about how wealth gets made and maintained. Sounds romantic. His laugh was bitter. Romance isn't typically part of these arrangements. But you've avoided them so far. I have. He leaned back, wine glass in hand, much to my father's frustration. Giuseppe retired 5 years ago expecting me to follow tradition, take over the business, make a strategic marriage, produce heirs. I've managed 2 out of 3. No heirs, no marriage. His gaze held mine. No one suitable has appeared. Something in his tone made my pulse quicken. Giacomo, 3 weeks ago, you walked into my kitchen wearing my robe, drinking my coffee, completely unafraid despite knowing who I am. You saw through Marino's fake in 30 seconds. You talk about paper fibers and binding techniques with more passion than most people discuss anything. He set down his glass. You're the most unsuitable woman I've ever met, and I can't stop thinking about you. I should have expected this, should have seen it building through lunches and bookstore visits, and the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. But hearing it stated so baldly still stole my breath. I'm your sister's best friend. I'm aware. We're from completely different worlds. Also aware. This is a terrible idea. The worst. He reached across the table, his fingers finding mine. Tell me you haven't thought about it. About us. I couldn't. Because I had thought about it, in those unguarded moments between sleep and waking, in the middle of restoration work when my mind wandered, in every conversation where his intensity made me feel seen in ways I'd never experienced. But wanting something didn't make it wise. I don't fit into your life, Giacomo. I work in a converted warehouse. I drink cheap wine and eat last night's pasta for lunch. I can't walk into galas and charity events and act like I belong in rooms full of people who measure worth in bloodlines and bank accounts. I'm not asking you to fit into anything. I'm asking if you feel what I feel when we're together. The rest, he gestured vaguely, is logistics. Logistics built on family obligations and business connections, and a world where people like Marino try to cheat you with fake manuscripts. I pulled my hand back. I've watched Alessandra navigate that pressure her whole life. I know what it costs. Then let me be clear about what I'm proposing. His voice dropped lower, more intense. Not marriage, not some strategic arrangement, just time. Us. Seeing where this goes without the weight of expectations. Your family is my problem, not yours. He leaned forward. Julia, I've spent 15 years making calculated decisions, weighing consequences, choosing duty over desire. For once, I want to choose something because I want it. Because you make me remember there's more to life than territory and tradition. The raw honesty in his voice cracked something in my carefully maintained walls. And when it gets complicated, when your world collides with mine, then we deal with it together. I wanted to believe him, wanted to ignore every warning sign and lean into the gravitational pull he seemed to exert on my common sense. I need to think, I said finally. This isn't a decision I can make over dinner. Fair enough. He signaled for the check. Take your time. But Julia, I'm patient when something matters. And you matter. He drove me back to my studio, walked me to the door despite my protests that it wasn't necessary. Under the streetlight, he looked younger somehow, less the intimidating businessman, and more just a man hoping for an answer he wanted. I mean it, he said. No pressure. Think about what you want, not what you think you should want. Then he left, and I climbed to my studio, my mind spinning through implications and possibilities, and the memory of his hand covering mine. I called Alessandra before I could talk myself out of it. Hey, she answered, sounding distracted. What's up? I need to tell you something, and you're going to be angry. Her attention sharpened. What did you do? I've been seeing your brother, not seeing exactly, but spending time with. He hired me to assess a manuscript, and then we had lunch, and then dinner tonight. And, wait, what? Her voice rose. Giacomo? My brother Giacomo? How many brothers do you have? One is more than enough. I heard her moving, a door closing. Are you serious right now? When? How? Why didn't you tell me? It just happened. Started happening. After that Sunday, I stayed over. I paced my studio, phone pressed to my ear. He found my number, asked me to look at a book, and it spiraled from there. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had gone flat. He asked you out. He did. And you said yes. Eventually. Julia. She sounded tired. Do you have any idea what you're getting into? Some. Maybe, I don't know. I stopped pacing, pressed my forehead against the cool glass of my window. That's why I'm calling. You kept us apart for 4 years. Tell me why. Really why? Another pause, then a sigh. Because he's complicated in ways you can't understand until you're already tangled up in them. Because his world has rules that don't make sense until you've broken them and seen the consequences. Because... Her voice cracked slightly. Because I love you both, and I don't want to watch what happens when your world collides with his. He said the same thing, about logistics. Logistics? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what he called it? Julia, my brother's logistics include family expectations dating back generations, business arrangements built on violence and intimidation, and enough complications to sink anyone who gets too close without understanding the weight. He said he wants me anyway, despite all of that. Of course he does. You're brilliant and genuine and everything he's never had in his carefully controlled life. You're exactly the kind of complication he'd choose. Her tone softened. But that doesn't mean it's safe for you. I don't want safe. I want honest. Then here's honesty. Giacomo Romano doesn't do casual. If you say yes to him, you're saying yes to everything that comes with him. And once you're in, getting out is significantly more complicated than walking away. You make it sound like a trap. Not a trap. A choice with consequences. I just want you to make it with your eyes open. We talked for another hour. Alessandra filling in details about her family's business, about the pressure Giacomo had been under since taking over, about the arranged marriage their father had been pushing, about Giacomo's track record with relationships, brief, strategic, carefully contained. He's never brought anyone around the family, she said. Never introduced us to anyone who mattered. If he's serious about you, Julia, it means something. I'm just not sure what yet. After we hung up, I stood at my window for a long time, watching the city lights blur in the distance. The smart choice was clear. Thank Giacomo for the dinner, maintain a professional relationship around the manuscript, and return to my carefully ordered life, where the biggest risk was accidentally damaging a centuries-old page. The other choice, the one that made my heart race and my common sense scream warnings, was to say yes. To see where this strange connection led, consequences be damned. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I worked on the Book of Hours, my hands moving through familiar motions while my mind raced through scenarios and outcomes. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I texted him at 7 a.m. One condition. When this gets complicated, not if, when, you don't hide me from the complications. I'm in this with eyes open or not at all. His response came within minutes. Deal. Have dinner with me tonight. Somewhere we can actually talk about what this means. Not dinner. Come to my studio at noon. I'll make lunch. If we're doing this, you see my world too. I'll be there. At exactly noon, he knocked on my studio door. I let him in, gestured to the makeshift kitchen area where I'd set up lunch. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad and bread from the bakery down the street. This is your world, he said, looking around at my workspace with its careful chaos of tools and books and works in progress. This is my world. No pretense, no expensive wine, no strategic seating arrangements. Just work and food and honesty. We ate at my work table, pushed to make room for plates. And between bites, we negotiated. What we wanted, time together, honesty, the freedom to see where this connection led. What we needed, boundaries with Alessandra, discretion around his business, understanding that my work came first just as his did. What we feared, his family's reaction, the inevitable collision of our different worlds, the possibility that wanting something wasn't enough to make it work. I can't promise this will be easy, he said, pushing his empty plate aside. My life comes with complications you haven't seen yet. And my life comes with a complete inability to compromise on my work and a stubborn streak that drives most people crazy. I met his eyes. But I want to try. If you're willing to be patient with me learning to navigate your world, then we have a deal. He extended his hand across the table, formal and slightly ridiculous in the context. I took it, felt the warm grip that sealed something neither of us fully understood yet. One more thing, I said. We tell Alessandra together. I don't want her finding out from someone else or feeling like we went behind her back more than we already have. He nodded. This weekend, we'll take her to dinner and explain. What we didn't know, as we shook hands over lunch in my studio, was that Alessandra had already set something in motion that would complicate things far beyond what either of us had anticipated. Alessandra took the news better than I'd feared, and worse than I'd hoped. We met at a quiet restaurant Saturday evening, neutral territory where no one had home advantage. She arrived 15 minutes late, which I recognized as a power move. Her brother recognized it too, if the slight tightening around his eyes was any indication. So, she said, settling into her chair and immediately ordering wine. You're dating. My best friend and my brother are dating. We're seeing where things go, I corrected carefully. That's just dating with commitment issues. She looked between us, her expression unreadable. How long has this been happening without me knowing? 3 weeks, Giacomo said, since I asked her to assess the manuscript. 3 weeks. And you're telling me now because we wanted to be sure it was something before making it your problem, I said. And because I didn't want you hearing it from someone else. She studied me for a long moment, then sighed. You're serious about this, both of you. It wasn't a question, but Giacomo answered anyway. Yes. Then I have something to tell you both, something I did before I knew about this development. She took a long drink of wine. Papa's been pressuring Giacomo about the Marino alliance, about marrying into their family to solidify business connections. I know, Giacomo said flatly. I've been refusing for 2 years. Right. But 2 weeks ago, after the Fabiano situation, Papa got more insistent, said you were making enemies instead of allies, that your refusal to marry was becoming a liability. She looked at me apologetically. I panicked. I told him you were already seeing someone seriously, that an announcement was imminent. My stomach dropped. Alessandra, what? I thought I was buying time. I figured you'd date some society woman eventually, and I could claim I'd been talking about her. She grimaced. I didn't know you were actually with Julia. Giacomo had gone very still. What exactly did you tell him? That you'd been seeing someone for months, that it was serious enough you were considering marriage, that she was from a good family, educated, respectable. Alessandra's voice dropped. I may have implied she was from one of the connected families, not Marino, but someone equally strategic. I'm a book restorer, I said faintly. I work in a warehouse. My family owns a bakery in Tuscany. I know, which is why this is a problem. She looked at her brother. Papa wants to meet her. This mystery woman who's captured your attention enough to refuse the Marino alliance. He's planning a family dinner next Friday. Giacomo's expression had gone from still to carved from stone. You lied to our father about my relationship status. I was trying to help. You were about to be railroaded into an arrangement with Fabiano's daughter, and I thought... She stopped, running her hands through her hair. I thought I had more time to figure it out. So now we have a choice, Giacomo said, his voice dangerously calm. I tell Papa the truth, that there is no fiancé, that Alessandra lied, and deal with the fallout. Or you bring Giulia and pretend she's the woman I described, Alessandra finished miserably. Which is insane, I know, but no. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Absolutely not. I'm not playing some game with your family, pretending to be someone I'm not. Giacomo caught my wrist gently. Giulia, sit. Let's think about this. There's nothing to think about. This is exactly the kind of complication I stopped, seeing Alessandra's stricken expression, Giacomo's careful calculation. This is insane. It is, he agreed. But Alessandra's not wrong about the timing. If I tell Papa the truth now, he'll push harder on the Marino alliance. And I refuse to be manipulated into a marriage that benefits everyone except me. So instead you'll manipulate your father by using me as a fake fiancé? I pulled my wrist free. How is that better? It's not. But it buys us time to figure out what this actually is between us. He gestured between us. Right now, we're 3 weeks into something neither of us fully understands. If we walk into family scrutiny this early, it'll kill whatever we're building before we know what it could be. I finished quietly. Alessandra leaned forward. I have an idea. A way to make this work temporarily. I'm almost afraid to ask, I said, but sat back down. We don't lie exactly. We just present the truth differently. She looked at me. Your family does own a bakery, right? In Tuscany? A small one. My parents supply local restaurants and hotels. Perfect. We position you as a business owner's daughter. Educated, respectable, cultured. All of which is true. She turned to Giacomo. You met her through work, the manuscript assessment. Also true. You were impressed by her expertise, started spending time together, realized it was serious. Completely true. Except the part where we pretend we're engaged, I pointed out. We don't have to go that far, just dating seriously. Let Papa draw his own conclusions about where it's heading. Alessandra was warming to her idea. One dinner. You meet the family, make a good impression, and then we have time to either make this relationship real enough to withstand scrutiny, or end it quietly before anyone gets hurt. I looked at Giacomo. You're actually considering this. I'm considering whether 6 months of fake relationship is better than 20 years of real misery in a strategic marriage. He met my eyes. I'm also considering that if we do this, if you agree to one dinner, one performance, you'll be giving me something no one else has. A choice about my future. That's not fair. You're making this about noble sacrifice when it's really about manipulation and lies. You're right. It's not fair. He didn't look away. But I'm asking anyway. One dinner. Meet my family. Let them think we're serious. And buy us time to figure out if we actually want to be. I should have said no. Should have walked away from the entire mess. Gone back to my studio and my manuscripts and my uncomplicated life. But I looked at Alessandra's guilty desperation, at Giacomo's careful control hiding what I'd learned to recognize as vulnerability, and felt my resistance crumbling. One dinner, I said finally. But we do this my way. I don't lie about who I am or where I come from. If they ask about my family, I tell them the truth. No pretending to be society or connected or anything I'm not. Agreed, Giacomo said immediately. And after this dinner, we reevaluate. If it's too complicated, if your family becomes a problem, we end this before it gets worse. Fair. And you owe me, I added, pointing at Alessandra. You owe me so much gelato and wine, and listening to me complain about my problems without making them about your family for at least a year. She smiled, relieved. Deal. I'm so sorry, Giulia. I really was trying to help. I know. Your helping just happens to be as complicated as your brother's entire existence. The rest of dinner was spent planning. Alessandra coached me on family dynamics. Giuseppe was traditional but fair. Paola was warm but shrewd. And there would be extended family, including cousins and business associates, who'd be assessing me with the calculation of jewelers examining stones. Just be yourself, Giacomo said as we left the restaurant. The version of yourself who isn't afraid to call me out when I'm being arrogant. That's every version of myself. Exactly. He caught my hand, pulling me back as Alessandra walked ahead toward her car. Thank you for agreeing to this insanity. I'm still not sure why I did. Because under that practical exterior, you're curious about what this could be, and because you're brave enough to walk into complicated situations if the outcome matters. He kissed me then, in the middle of the sidewalk, with his sister pretending not to watch from 20 feet away. It was the first time, surprising and inevitable at once, tasting like wine and poor decisions and the dangerous certainty that I was already in too deep to back out now. When we broke apart, I said, if this dinner goes badly, it won't. But if it does, I'm blaming you and your sister equally. Fair enough. The next 5 days passed in a blur of preparation. Alessandra took me shopping for an appropriate dress, despite my protests that I had perfectly acceptable clothes. We compromised on something simple but elegant, deep blue silk that she claimed walked the line between sophisticated and approachable. Giacomo checked in daily, asking if I was okay, if I needed anything, if I wanted to back out. Each time I considered saying yes, considered ending this before the dinner that would seal us into whatever came next. But each time, I thought about the way he looked at me when I explained restoration techniques, the way he listened like my words mattered, the way he'd held my hand in his office and said I was complicated in ways he didn't know what to do with. So I said no, I wouldn't back out, and prepared myself to walk into the Romano family dinner like I belonged there. Friday evening arrived too quickly. Giacomo picked me up at 6, looking devastating in a dark suit that made his eyes even more intense. You're nervous, he observed as I slid into his car. I'm terrified. There's a difference. You faced down my interrogation in my kitchen wearing nothing but a robe. You exposed Marino's fraud in front of him. You can handle my family. Your family thinks I might marry you someday, slightly higher stakes than manuscript authentication. He reached over, took my hand. If anyone makes you uncomfortable, we leave. No questions, no explanations. We just go. You can't leave your family dinner because someone made me uncomfortable. Watch me. The certainty in his voice steadied something in my chest. The Romano family estate was in the hills outside the city, a sprawling villa that managed to be both fortress and home. Security at the gates recognized Giacomo's car, waved us through without stopping. You grew up here, I said, taking in the manicured grounds. Until I moved to the city penthouse 5 years ago. My parents still live here. Alessandra has an apartment in the guest house. He pulled up to the main entrance. Ready? Not even slightly. Perfect. Me neither. He came around to open my door, offered his hand. I took it, feeling the calluses against my palm, the same hands that commanded empires and made perfect breakfast omelets and held centuries-old manuscripts with reverence. Giuseppe and Paola Romano waited in the entrance hall, him tall and silver-haired with Giacomo's same intensity, her elegant and warm with Alessandra's smile. Behind them stood what appeared to be half of extended family, and several people I assumed were business associates. Papa, Mamma, Giacomo said, his hand firm at the small of my back. This is Giulia Ferretti. I extended my hand, channeling every ounce of confidence I'd learned from years of presenting restoration proposals to skeptical museum boards. It's a pleasure to meet you both. Thank you for inviting me. Giuseppe's handshake was testing, not crushing, but firm enough to gauge strength. Ferretti, From Tuscany? My family owns a bakery outside Florence. Small operation, but we've supplied regional restaurants for 3 generations. Honest work. He studied me with the same assessing look his son had perfected. And you're a restorer. Books and manuscripts. Yes, I specialize in medieval and Renaissance texts, though I work with volumes from any period that need attention. Paola stepped forward, taking both my hands in hers. And you've been seeing our stubborn son for how long? 3 months, I lied smoothly, using Alessandra's timeline. We met when he asked me to assess a manuscript from his grandfather's estate. 3 months and we're only meeting you now? Paola shot her son a look. Giacomo, you're terrible at sharing good news. I wanted to be sure Giulia could tolerate the family before subjecting her to full Romano scrutiny, he said dryly. Smart man. Paola linked her arm through mine, leading me toward what appeared to be a formal dining room. Come, tell me everything. Giacomo's been impossible about details. The dinner was exactly as complicated as I'd feared. 20 people at a table that gleamed with crystal and silver, courses that kept coming, and conversation that danced around business and family and subtle assessments of my suitability. I answered questions honestly, about my work, my family, how I'd met Giacomo. I asked questions too, showing interest in the family business ventures that were legitimate, steering conversations away from areas I didn't want to explore. And through it all, Giacomo stayed close. A hand at my back when we moved between rooms. A slight smile when I held my own against his cousin's probing questions about restoration ethics. A look that said you're doing perfectly when I caught his eye across the table. By dessert, I'd charmed Paola, earned Giuseppe's grudging respect, and won over most of the extended family. Only Angelo, Giacomo's head of security, who I recognized from his office, watched me with continued wariness. After dinner, Giuseppe pulled Giacomo aside for private conversation. I found myself on the terrace with Paola and Alessandra, looking out over city lights in the distance. You're good for him, Paola said suddenly. I haven't seen Giacomo this relaxed in years. We're still getting to know each other, I said carefully. But you're serious about him. I can see it. She patted my hand. Good. He needs someone who doesn't want him for his name or his money. Someone who sees the man underneath all the complications. Guilt twisted in my chest, because I did see that man. But she didn't know the relationship was less than a month old and built on her daughter's well-intentioned lies. When Giacomo returned, his expression was unreadable. Papa wants to meet with you tomorrow. Just you. Why? To discuss your intentions regarding his son, I imagine. He smiled slightly. He's old-fashioned about these things. Giacomo, you don't have to go. I can tell him it's too soon for that conversation. I thought about walking away, about ending this before the lies compounded into something unrecoverable. But I also thought about Paola's words, about Giacomo's careful protection of me all evening, about the fact that somewhere in the last month, this had stopped being entirely fake. I'll meet with him, I said. Tomorrow afternoon, 2:00. He looked surprised. You're sure? Not even slightly, but I'm doing it anyway. That night, he drove me home, walked me to my studio door. Under the streetlight, he said, You were incredible tonight. Perfect. I was terrified and lying through my teeth about timeline. But you were yourself. That's what mattered. He cupped my face. Thank you. For doing this. For giving me a choice I didn't think I'd have. Don't thank me yet. Your father might see right through me tomorrow. Even if he does, you gave me tonight. That's worth whatever comes next. He kissed me goodnight. Longer, deeper than the restaurant kiss. Tasting like promise and complication, and the dangerous addictiveness of playing with fire while pretending not to feel the heat. The next afternoon, I returned to the Romano estate. This time, Giuseppe met me alone in his study, all wood paneling and leather and the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of wielding power. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. I sat, hands folded in my lap, channeling the composure that had gotten me through countless difficult conversations with clients. He studied me for a long moment. "My son is in love with you." The words hit like physical impact. "Sir, I don't think..." I've known Giacomo for 34 years, raised him, trained him, watched him become the man he is, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Giuseppe leaned back in his chair. "So I have one question. Are you in love with him?" Truth. That's what he was asking for. Not timeline, not pretense, just the one thing that mattered. "I'm falling," I admitted quietly. "I didn't plan to. But yes, I'm falling in love with your son." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll be direct. My world, my family's business comes with complications, dangers, expectations. If you commit to Giacomo, you commit to all of it. Can you handle that?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm still learning what all of it means, but I'm willing to try if he is." "Good, because my son deserves someone brave enough to try rather than someone convenient enough to fit." He stood, extending his hand. "Welcome to the family, Julia, officially or otherwise." I shook his hand, feeling the weight of what I'd just agreed to settle onto my shoulders like one of my centuries-old manuscripts, precious, fragile, requiring careful handling to preserve. When I left that study, I texted Giacomo. "Your father is terrifying, and I think he likes me. Also, I might have just accidentally committed to falling in love with you. Thought you should know." His response came immediately. "Good, because I'm already there. Come to the penthouse tonight. We should talk about what happens next. What happened next would change everything." But standing in the Romano estate, feeling the weight of history and family and choices made centuries ago still reverberating, I realized I was ready. Ready to stop running from complications and start facing them with someone who made them feel worth navigating. The arrangement Alessandra had inadvertently created should have lasted 6 months. Long enough for me to become a familiar fixture at family events, for Giacomo to demonstrate he was settled, for the pressure about the Marino alliance to dissipate naturally. It lasted 8 weeks before everything collapsed. Those 8 weeks were strange and beautiful, and more complicated than any manuscript I'd ever restored. I split my time between my studio and Giacomo's penthouse, between restoration work and family dinners, between my humble reality and his luxury empire. He kept his word about not hiding me from complications. I learned the real scope of the Romano business, not just the legitimate holdings, but the territories, the influence, the careful balance between legal enterprise and darker necessities. He walked me through it with brutal honesty, giving me chances to leave before I was in too deep. I stayed anyway. In return, I showed him my world. The painstaking precision of restoration, the satisfaction of making broken things whole again, the way history lived in paper and ink and leather. He'd appear at my studio with coffee, sit quietly while I worked, ask questions that showed he understood the craft behind the art. We attended family gatherings where Paola fussed over me and Giuseppe assessed me with continued approval. We went to galas where I wore borrowed dresses and learned to navigate conversations about art and business and carefully coded threats. We spent quiet Sundays in his penthouse where I cooked simple meals and he read while I worked, and it felt almost normal. Almost. Because beneath the surface, 2 problems were growing. First, I was actually falling in love with him. Not the performance version, not the arrangement. The real man who made perfect espresso and listened to me explain paper fibers and looked at me like I was the most interesting mystery he'd ever encountered. Second, someone didn't want us together. The signs started small. A photographer outside my studio, too interested in my comings and goings. Questions from clients about my connection to the Romano family. A break-in at my studio where nothing was stolen but everything had been carefully searched. Someone's investigating you, Angelo told me bluntly after the break-in. He'd started appearing outside my studio, Giacomo's gift of security I couldn't refuse. Trying to find dirt, leverage, anything that could be used against the boss. Who? Working on that, but you need to be careful. No more walking home alone, no more predictable routines. I told Giacomo that evening, sitting in his office while he worked late. He didn't look surprised, just tired. I was hoping we'd have more time before this started. Before what started? The pressure, the attacks, the systematic attempts to break what we're building because it doesn't fit the plan certain people had for my future. He set down his pen, met my eyes. This is what I meant about complications. My choices affect more than just me. So what do? We have options. He stood, moved to the window. I can announce publicly that we're serious. Make it clear you're not going anywhere, which might make you more of a target, but also more protected. Or we can end this now, before you're pulled deeper into something you never asked for. You want to end it? I want you safe. He turned to face me. But I also want you with me. Those two things might be incompatible. I thought about walking away, about returning to my quiet life, where the biggest danger was paper cuts and the worst complication was a difficult binding repair. I'm not leaving, I said, but I'm also not hiding. Whatever announcement you need to make it. I'm done pretending this is temporary. Relief washed across his face. You're sure? Completely terrified and completely sure. I stood, closed the distance between us. Someone needs to teach you that not everything in your life has to be a calculated risk. You're the biggest risk I've ever taken. Then let's make it worth it. He kissed me, and it felt different than before. Not tentative or exploratory, but claiming. A line being crossed from performance into reality. The announcement went out 3 days later through official channels. Giacomo Romano was in a serious relationship with Giulia Ferretti, a book restoration specialist. The family was delighted. No further comment. The response was immediate and violent. My studio was vandalized, not with random destruction, but surgical damage. Tools broken, works in progress destroyed, clients' manuscripts deliberately ruined. Decades of reputation decimated in one night. I stood in the wreckage the next morning, Angelo beside me, trying not to cry at the loss. Not just money, though that was devastating, but trust. The sacred bond between restorer and client, shattered because someone wanted to hurt Giacomo through me. He arrived 20 minutes later, took one look at the damage, and his expression went arctic. Angelo, find out who did this. Already working on it, boss. Work faster. Giacomo turned to me, his voice gentling. Giulia, don't say you're sorry. Don't say you should have protected me better. Don't make this about guilt. I gestured at the destruction. Just tell me we're going to fix it. We will. I'll compensate every client personally. We'll rebuild your equipment, your workspace, everything. He pulled me against him, and I let myself lean into his strength. But right now, you're coming home with me. Not the penthouse, somewhere safer. I'm not hiding. You're not hiding. You're being strategic. There's a difference. He took me to a property I didn't know he owned, a restored farmhouse outside the city, isolated and secure. Alessandra was already there, having been moved the same day my studio was hit. They're escalating, she said bluntly. Whoever's behind this wants to prove you're a liability, Giacomo, that protecting Giulia costs too much. Then they've miscalculated. He was on his phone, issuing orders I only half heard. Because now I'm not just protecting her, I'm hunting whoever did this. Over the next week, the full scope of the Romano Empire became visible. Angelo and his team worked with efficiency that suggested this wasn't their first investigation. Giacomo made calls, called in favors, applied pressure through channels I didn't fully understand. I stayed at the farmhouse with Alessandra, working on what manuscripts I'd managed to save, trying not to feel like a prisoner in protective custody. "I'm sorry," Alessandra said one evening, the guilt written across her face. "This is my fault. If I hadn't lied to Papa—" "This would have happened anyway," I interrupted. "Maybe later, maybe differently, but anyone who got close to your brother would become a target. At least this way, we knew what we were walking into." "Did we, though? Did you really understand what you were agreeing to?" I thought about my destroyed studio, my compromised safety, the way my simple life had exploded into chaos. No. But I'm learning. The breakthrough came on day 6. Angelo appeared at the farmhouse with news that made Giacomo's expression shift from controlled fury into something colder. "It was Claudio Marino's daughter," Angelo reported. "Giovanna. She hired professionals to send a message about the broken engagement understanding." "There was no engagement understanding," Giacomo said flatly. "Her father led her to believe there was, that the marriage was agreed upon, just waiting for official announcement. When you started appearing publicly with Giulia instead." Angelo shrugged. "She decided to eliminate the competition." I felt cold. "She destroyed my studio because she thought we were engaged? She destroyed your studio because you represented everything she'd been promised and lost." Angelo pulled out his phone, showing surveillance footage. "We have her on camera directing the professionals. Enough for charges if you want to press them." "No charges," Giacomo said immediately. "We handle this internally." "What does that mean?" I asked. He looked at me, and I saw the man beneath the businessman, the one who'd been trained since childhood to solve problems with violence when necessary. "It means I'm going to have a conversation with Fabiano Marino about controlling his daughter's behavior. And if he can't, I will. Giacomo, this isn't negotiable, Giulia. She came after you because of me. That requires a response. A response, not a war. Trust me to know the difference." I did trust him. That was the terrifying part. I trusted this man who operated in a world where handling things internally meant something far different than legal recourse. The meeting with Fabiano Marino happened 2 days later, at a neutral location with both families' security present. I wasn't invited, but Alessandra filled me in afterward. "Giacomo was controlled," she said carefully, "but scary. Told Fabiano that any further action against you would be considered an act against the entire Romano family, that Giovanna needed to be sent away until she learned to manage her disappointment like an adult. And Marino agreed. He didn't have a choice. Giacomo made it clear this was the peaceful option." She paused. "My brother can be terrifying when someone threatens what he loves." What he loves. The phrase settled over me with weight I wasn't ready to examine. When Giacomo returned that evening, I was waiting in the farmhouse kitchen, pretending to read while actually watching the door. "It's handled," he said, collapsing onto the couch beside me. "Giovanna's being sent to their family estate in Sicily. Marino will compensate you for the damage. And we've reached an understanding about boundaries." "What kind of understanding?" "The kind where everyone agrees that harming you would be terminally bad for their own health." He pulled me against his side, his tension slowly bleeding out. "You can go back to the city. Back to your studio, though I'd prefer if you moved some of your work to the penthouse. So I'm safe now. Safer. You're always going to have some risk being with me. But the immediate threat is neutralized." I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt angry. This is your life. Crisis management and threats and violent solutions to human problems. Yes, and you want me in it permanently. Yes. Why? I pulled away to look at him directly. Why me, Giacomo? Why is it worth all of this? He was quiet for a long moment, his hand coming up to cup my face. Because before you, I was playing a role. Dutiful son, careful businessman, strategic decision maker. Everything calculated, nothing real. And then you crashed into my life wearing my robe and drinking my coffee and calling me paranoid to my face, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to want something that wasn't part of the plan. I'm not some key to your personal freedom. No, you're the person who makes freedom feel possible. He kissed me softly. I know this has been terrifying. I know I've dragged you into situations you never asked for, but I'm asking now, clearly. Will you stay? Not because of arrangements or family expectations, but because you want to build something real with me. 3 months ago, I'd been a book restorer who kept to myself, avoided complications, and measured success in completed manuscripts. Now I was sitting in a guarded farmhouse with a man who'd just threatened violence on my behalf, choosing between safety and something that felt startlingly like love. I'll stay, I said, but on 2 conditions. Name them. First, you don't make decisions about my safety without consulting me. I'm not fragile and I'm not helpless. If we're partners, we act like it. Agreed. Second, you let me teach you that not everything has to be protected through control and force. Sometimes the best way to preserve something precious is to trust it to survive on its own strength. He smiled, understanding the metaphor. Like your manuscripts. Like everything worth keeping. We stayed at the farmhouse for 3 more days, using the forced isolation to figure out what we actually were when stripped of performances and family expectations. We talked through boundaries and fears and the practical logistics of merging 2 completely different lives. And somewhere in those conversations, the fake arrangement Alessandra had created became the real relationship neither of us had planned for. When we finally returned to the city, my studio was restored. Better equipment than I'd had before. Improved security. A formal apology from Fabiano Marino delivered through lawyers. But the most significant change was the small apartment Giacomo had secured in the building next to his penthouse. Your space, he said, handing me keys. So you can work without my world constantly intruding, but close enough that I can bring you coffee when you're working late. It was the perfect compromise between independence and connection. That night, lying in his bed with the city lights painting shadows across the ceiling, I said, Your father asked me 8 weeks ago if I was falling in love with you. What did you tell him? That I was, past tense, uncertain. I turned to look at him. But I'm not falling anymore, Giacomo. I'm there, completely terrifyingly there. His arms tightened around me. Good. Because I've been there since you told me my chocolate preferences were uncivilized. I never said that. You implied it heavily. That's different. He laughed, and I felt the sound rumble through his chest into mine. This was real. Complicated and dangerous and nothing like the life I'd imagined. But real in ways that mattered more than safety. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Inside, 2 people who'd started as strangers in a kitchen figured out how to become partners in something bigger than either had anticipated. The call came at 4 a.m, 3 months after Giovanna Marino's forced exile. I woke to Giacomo already on his phone, his voice clipped with the kind of controlled fury I'd learned meant serious trouble. He was out of bed, pacing naked to the window, silhouetted against pre-dawn darkness. When? A pause. How many? Another pause, longer. Keep her there. I'm coming now. He ended the call, and I was already sitting up. What happened? Alessandra's apartment was broken into. She's safe. She was at a friend's place. But whoever did this left a message. His jaw tightened. Addressed to me. I was out of bed, pulling on clothes. I'm coming with you. Julia. Don't. We agreed. Partners means I don't sit home waiting while you handle crises. He studied me for 3 seconds, then nodded. Get dressed. We leave in 5. Angelo met us in the lobby with 2 other security personnel I'd come to recognize. The drive to Alessandra's apartment was silent, except for Giacomo's rapid-fire calls, mobilizing resources and information networks. The apartment looked untouched from the outside. Inside was a different story. Nothing had been stolen. But every surface, every wall, every mirror had been marked with the same message in red paint that I hoped was just paint. This could have been her. Alessandra stood in her living room, wrapped in a blanket despite the summer heat, shaking slightly. I went to her immediately while Giacomo surveyed the damage with Angelo. "I'm okay," she said before I could ask. "Just shaken. If I'd been home. But you weren't. You're safe." I hugged her tightly. "That's what matters." "They're escalating," Angelo said from across the room. "This isn't about territory or business anymore. This is personal." "Who?" Giacomo's voice was dangerously quiet. "Who's behind this?" "Still investigating, but the signature matches the original vandalism on Giulia's studio. Same professionals, same style." Angelo pulled up images on his tablet. "Someone really wants to send you a message." Message received. Giacomo's expression had gone absolutely cold. "Find them. I want names by tonight." Over the next week, the investigation intensified. More security appeared around everyone in the family. My apartment next to his penthouse gained cameras and reinforced doors. Alessandra moved back to the family estate temporarily, surrounded by her father's security team, and I watched Giacomo transform into someone I'd only glimpsed before, the man who'd built and maintained power through strategic violence and absolute control. "We have a name," Angelo finally reported one evening. "Not Giovanna this time. Her cousin, Matteo Marino. Apparently he's been in love with Giovanna since they were teenagers, took her humiliation personally. Where is he? Sicily. Under Fabiano's protection, theoretically." Angelo hesitated. "Boss, if we go after him..." "We're not going after him. I'm going to have a conversation with Fabiano about family management." Giacomo's tone left no room for discussion. "And if that conversation doesn't resolve things, then we escalate." "Giacomo." I stepped into his office, having heard enough. "What does escalate mean in this context?" He looked at me, and I saw the weight of 15 years of this life in his eyes. "It means I stop being diplomatic and start being what people think I am. A monster. A necessity." He moved to pour whiskey, offered me a glass I declined. "This is why I wanted you to understand what being with me meant, Giulia. These moments where choosing mercy might cost more than choosing violence. So you're planning violence. I'm planning to protect my family by whatever means necessary. If that includes violence, then yes." I should have argued. Should have tried to convince him there were legal, civilized, non-violent solutions. But I'd spent 3 months learning his world. I knew how inadequate legal solutions were when family honor and blood feuds entered the equation. "Then I'm going with you." "Absolutely not." "Partners. Remember? You don't face this alone. This isn't a negotiation. You're not walking into a situation that could turn violent." "Fine. Then I'll wait here while you potentially get yourself killed, proving a point about family protection." I crossed my arms. "How's that for partnership?" We stared at each other across his desk, wills clashing with the force of months of learning to navigate each other's stubbornness. Finally, he said, "You stay in the car with Angelo. No arguments, no following me inside, no heroics. Agreed?" "Agreed." The meeting with Fabiano Marino happened 2 days later, at his private villa outside the city. Giacomo brought minimal security, just Angelo and 2 others. A show of confidence rather than force. I sat in the car as promised, watching through tinted windows as Giacomo disappeared inside. Angelo remained with me, tense and alert. "He'll be fine," Angelo said, though I wasn't sure if he was reassuring me or himself. "How often does he do this? Walk into potentially dangerous meetings?" "More often than he should. Less often since you appeared." Angelo glanced at me. "You're good for him. Make him remember there are stakes beyond business and territory." "I'm not sure that's entirely positive." Stakes make people reckless. Or careful. Depends on the person. We sat in tense silence for 40 minutes. Then voices, raised, angry, coming from inside the villa. Angelo's hand moved to his weapon, his body coiling with readiness. But then Giacomo appeared, walking calmly out of the villa with his security. Not running, not fleeing, just walking with the measured pace of someone who'd gotten what he came for. He slid into the car, his expression unreadable. Drive. We were 5 minutes away before he spoke again. Matteo Marino will be apologizing to Alessandra personally within the week. He'll also be compensating her for the trauma and property damage. And he'll be stationed in Sicily permanently, where Fabiano will ensure he learns to manage his romantic disappointments without threatening innocent people. And if he doesn't comply, I asked, then Fabiano loses access to 3 territories he currently enjoys through our family's goodwill. Giacomo's smile was knife-sharp. He'll comply. No violence. Not this time. But the threat was clear enough. He took my hand, lacing our fingers together. Sometimes the anticipation of consequences is more effective than the consequences themselves. You sound like you're describing manuscript conservation. Maybe your philosophy is more broadly applicable than you realized. Back at the penthouse, Alessandra was waiting with Paola and Giuseppe. The family dinner that followed felt like a celebration. Crisis averted, threat neutralized, normal life resuming. Except nothing felt normal anymore. I can't do this, I told Giacomo that night, standing at his window with the city spread below. This life of constant threats and crisis management, and wondering if every knock on the door is another message written in paint or blood. I know. I turned to face him. That's it? Just, I know? What else can I say? You're right. This is my life. Has been for 15 years. Will be until I figure out how to exit gracefully. He moved closer, but didn't touch me. I can't ask you to accept that. All I can do is promise that I'll make it as safe as possible for you. Safe isn't the same as good, Giacomo. No, but it's what I have to offer. I thought about my manuscripts, about the hours I spent preserving broken things because they mattered, despite their damage. About the philosophy I'd just heard him quote back to me. What if you left? I asked quietly. What if you stepped away from the family business, built something completely legitimate? That's not possible. This empire doesn't have an exit door. Everything has an exit if you're willing to pay the price. I took his hands. You've spent 3 months showing me your world. Now let me show you mine, where success isn't measured in territories controlled, but in things preserved, where legacy means what you build, not what you inherit. You're asking me to walk away from everything. I'm asking if there's anything and everything that matters more than building something real with me. He was quiet for so long I thought I'd lost him. Then, my father built this empire, my grandfather before him. Walking away would be betraying generations, or honoring them by choosing something different, something better. It would take years. Selling off holdings, restructuring, ensuring the transition doesn't create power vacuums that lead to violence. Then we have time. Years to figure out how to build the life we actually want, instead of the one we inherited. He pulled me against him, his forehead resting against mine. You make it sound possible. You made falling in love with a mafioso sound possible. I'm just returning the favor. I'm not a mafioso. I'm a businessman with complicated family investments. You threatened Fabiano Marino in his own villa this afternoon. Diplomatically threatened. There's a difference. I laughed, the sound surprising us both. We're insane. Completely. He kissed me, soft and certain. But I'll do it. For you, for us, I'll find a way out. Not for me, for yourself. for the life you actually want instead of the one you've been told to want. What I want is you. Everything else is just logistics. The transition took 3 years. 3 years of careful divestment, strategic restructuring, finding reliable people to take over territories and holdings. 3 years of family arguments and compromises, and Giuseppe's grudging acceptance that his son was choosing a different path. 3 years of me building my own restoration business, expanding beyond my studio to teach workshops, consult for museums, publish research on medieval manuscript preservation techniques. We got married in the 2nd year, in a small ceremony that managed to honor both our worlds. Alessandra was my maid of honor, wearing a dress the color of old vellum. Giuseppe gave me away since my father's health didn't permit the journey, tears in his eyes that he pretended were about something else. By the 3rd year, Giacomo had transformed the Romano holdings into something almost entirely legitimate. Real estate without the territorial implications, import-export without the shadow dealings, investments that could be discussed in public without careful euphemisms. I kept 3 things, he told me one evening, showing me the final portfolio. The building with the restaurant where we had our first lunch, your studio building, because the rent you're paying yourself is criminal, and the farmhouse outside the city, because that's where we figured out how to be real. You're sentimental under all that careful control, only about you. He set aside the papers, pulled me into his lap. Giuseppe officially retired last month. Angelo's taking over as head of operations for what remains of the family business. And I'm now just a wealthy investor with excellent taste in wine and beautiful women. Just one beautiful woman, I hope. Just one. She's terrifying and stubborn and spends most of her time covered in book dust, and I've never wanted anything more. We moved between his penthouse and my studio, between family obligations and professional achievements, building something that belonged entirely to us. Alessandra flourished in the family business, revealing a talent for negotiation that made her father beam with pride. Paola divided her time between organizing charity events and plotting about grandchildren she didn't have yet. On our 3rd anniversary, I finished restoring the manuscript from Giacomo's grandfather, the one that had brought us together. The medical treatise was now museum quality, every page stabilized, every word legible, ready to be shared with researchers and historians. "It's perfect," he said, examining my work with the careful attention I'd taught him. "You made it whole again." Not whole. Better than whole. Honest about its age and damage, but preserved for centuries more of use. I traced the leather binding I'd reconstructed. Like us, really. Not hiding the complications, but building frameworks that support what matters. He pulled me into a kiss that tasted like cedar and promise, and the strange magic of 2 people who'd started as strangers in a kitchen, and chosen each other through crisis and chaos and complicated family dynamics. Outside his office window, the city spread in all directions, full of territory someone else now managed, full of power someone else now wielded. But inside, we'd built something smaller and infinitely more valuable. A partnership that didn't require protection because it was built on trust. A love that didn't need to be perfect because it was perfectly honest. A future that belonged entirely to us. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Leaving the empire behind?" Every empire falls eventually. Better to walk away while choosing the successor than to be toppled by time or rivals. He smiled against my hair. "Besides, I found something better." "What's that?" "A woman who looked at my most dangerous self and decided I was worth restoring. Who saw potential beneath the damage and built frameworks to support what mattered." He tilted my face up to meet his eyes. "You preserved me, Julia. The way you preserve your manuscripts, with patience and precision and absolute faith that broken things can be made beautiful again. You were never broken, just underappreciated. I love you. I know. You've been showing me for 3 years. And I'll keep showing you for the next 60 if you'll let me." I kissed him, tasting the future in that contact, complicated and beautiful, and entirely ours. Built not on territory or tradition, but on choice. The choice to see past reputations to reality. To find love in unexpected morning encounters. To preserve what mattered and let everything else fall away. Because some things were worth protecting through any complication. And some people were worth choosing, again and again, every single day. Even when, especially when, they first appeared in your kitchen at dawn, looking dangerous and devastating and completely, perfectly wrong in all the right ways. Sometimes the most dangerous risks lead to the most beautiful rewards. Giulia and Giacomo's journey from a shocking kitchen encounter to building a life together reminds us that love doesn't ask permission. It transforms everything. Their story shows that even complicated beginnings can lead to extraordinary partnerships when two people choose honesty and courage over comfort. If this story touched your heart, show some love with a like. What would you have done in Giulia's place? Walked away from the complications, or taken the risk? Share your thoughts below.